Namaskar. Today we will discuss the causes of disequilibrium of balance of payment. I have already discussed the concept of balance of payment in my previous class. So today's class is based on the causes which are responsible for the disequilibrium of balance of payment. Before that, I just want to repeat again what do you mean by equilibrium and disequilibrium of balance of payment. So when export is equal with import, export is known as X and import is known as M. When X is equal with M, that means export is equal with import. This is known as equilibrium of balance of payment. On the contrary, when export is not equal with import, means X is not equal with M, this is known as a disequilibrium of balance of payment. And further, the disequilibrium of balance of payment is divided into two types, surplus and deficit. Surplus occurs when export is greater than import. Deficit occurs when import is exceeding exports. And surplus side is otherwise known as credit side, plus, positive and favorable. And deficit side is otherwise known as minus, negative, unfavorable, and you can say that is known as a debit side. Debit side, unfavorable, negative, minus. And surplus balance of payment is not our problem. So problem lies on deficit. So whatever may be the cause, we will discuss one by one. Okay. So our developing countries or less developed countries are facing the balance of payment problem. That is known as disequilibrium of balance of payment. Different causes, several causes which are responsible for disequilibrium of balance of payment. First cause is development schemes. When less developed countries or developing countries try to invest huge amount of resources on the development schemes for the development of the country, so there will be problem because there is a huge shortage of resources in these types of countries. So less developed countries or developing countries depends on the developed countries. Less developed and developing countries depends on the developed countries for these kinds of capital. Because these development schemes means social overhead capital or economic overhead capital needs huge amount of resources, huge amount of investments, because these types of investment are very much necessary for the economic development of the country. And unfortunately, these types of countries like less developed countries or developing countries have lack of resources, huge amount of shortage of resources, so that they are depending upon the foreign country for the importing of these types of any kind of capital and also your technical know-how. As a result, we can say these less developed or developing countries face the balance of payment disequilibrium, especially unfavorable disequilibrium. Second cause is price cost structure. Price cost structure also affects the causes of price cost structure also affects the disequilibrium of balance of payment. Why? Because when the price of the commodity rises due to rise in the cost of production, and this cost of production rises because of higher wages, because of higher rent, because of higher interest, and also higher prices of the raw materials. So price will be rising means the demand for the product will be falling. So export of these types of these countries will be declining. So export falls and import rises. So balance of payment will be disequilibrium, and especially this is known as your unfavorable disequilibrium of balance of payment. Okay. Next point, changes in foreign exchange rate. Sometimes foreign exchange rate rises, sometimes foreign exchange rate falls. When foreign exchange rate rises, this is known as appreciation. When foreign exchange rate falls, this is known as depreciation or devaluation. Appreciation leads to export costlier and import cheaper. So import will be higher than export. This is known as the balance of payment disequilibrium. Unfavorable debit side, negative minus deficit. Okay. On the opposite case, when depreciation means devaluation means what? Depreciation, devaluation, two different things. So, but meaning is same, but one is the official reduction, another is your automatic. So, depreciation and devaluation means when this occurs means if when lowering the external value of the domestic currency in comparison to foreign currency, there is depreciation. So, depreciation leads to what? Export will be higher because here export will be cheaper and import will be costlier. Export will be cheaper means more amount of the export will be there. So that export is greater than import. So balance of payment will be favorable and balance of payment will be your surplus. Okay. So surplus or deficit. These are the causes which are responsible for disequilibrium of balance of payment. Next point, demonstration effect. Demonstration effect is very important point because Ragnar Norksey has said that due to the demonstration effect, the less developed countries or developing countries face the balance of payment disequilibrium. Why? Because the consumption pattern of the developing countries, the consumption pattern of the less developed countries is higher because they are following the consumption pattern of the developed countries. When the people of the less developed countries or developing countries follow the consumption pattern of the developed countries, at that time their consumption rises. That means their import rises. When import is greater than export, this is known as balance of payment deficit balance of payment, and this deficit balance of payment is otherwise known as your disequilibrium of balance of payment. Okay. Next point, your international borrowing and lending. International borrowing and lending is also another cause. Why? When the country is borrowing, means less developed country is borrowing because of lack of resources, because of development schemes, because of so many reasons are there. When the country is trying to borrow, so borrowing countries are in case of unfavorable balance of payment and the lending countries are in case of favorable balance of payment. Okay. Next point, newly independent countries. In order to maintain the international prestige, in order to maintain the international relations, newly independent countries require huge amount of funds or resources or capital, because for the establishment of embassies, for the establishment of missions, for the establishment of different types of social overhead capitals, economic overhead capital, infrastructure, every kind of development. So, for this also huge amount of resources are needed, but unfortunately these resources are very means these countries have lack of resources and also they are facing huge shortage of resources. So these countries depend upon the foreign countries for the importing items. That's why import is exceeding exports and balance payment is also deficit. Next point, your population explosion. Population explosion is the most important cause of disequilibrium of balance of payment. When the population explosion occurs due to the second stage of demographic transition, high birth rate and low death rate. When there is population explosion occurs means population increases at a skyrocketed rate. At that time, the consumption pattern of this growing population is higher. So, when the consumption pattern of the growing population is higher, definitely the export will be lower, and also after that they are importing the goods from the foreign country for the consumption, because it means our export is not meeting the needs of the growing population. That's why they depend upon the foreign countries for importing items. That's why your consumption means import is greater than export, so balance of payment will be deficit, and deficit is also unfavorable and negative and minus, and also this is known as a disequilibrium of balance of payment. Last but not the least, it is very important. Why? Because natural factors are also important, because we are facing the natural factors for the unfavorable balance payment. Natural factors like natural calamities like cyclone, flood, earthquake like this, these are responsible for the destruction of these food grains, destructions of these productions. That's why that's why the people depend upon the country depend upon the foreign country for the consumption, because when there is natural calamities like flood, earthquake, tsunamis, cyclone, super cyclone, the production will be destroyed. For the consumption, they are depending upon the foreign countries for the to maintain their existence. So they are depending upon the foreign countries for the consumption. So import is greater than export, and balance of payment is unfavorable. So these are the points which are responsible for the unfavorable or favorable, means disequilibrium of balance of payment. In the next class, we will discuss the methods to correct the disequilibrium of balance of payment. And if you like and share and comment